Now to the focus of our conversation this morning, type 1 diabetes. Here is a glimpse of what the disease is about and the reality of living with it. Diabetes mellitus, or commonly known just as diabetes, is a chronic disease in which your blood glucose or blood sugar levels are too high. This could be an indication that your body is either not producing insulin to break down the glucose or is not using the insulin produced well enough. The common types of diabetes are type 1 and type 2 diabetes. For type 1 diabetes, the pancreas produces little or no insulin. Different factors, including genetics and some viruses, may contribute to type 1 diabetes. Although type 1 diabetes usually appears during childhood or adolescence, it can develop in adults. For type 2 diabetes, your body either resists the effects of or doesn't produce enough insulin to maintain normal glucose levels. Type 2 diabetes used to be known as adult-onset diabetes, but today more children are being diagnosed with the disorder, probably due to the rise in childhood obesity.
Now that one will give you how much?
My name is Khadija Abdul. I am in Form 3. My best subjects are history and science.
Can you see what you get?
I would like to be a journalist. I've been diabetic for 5 years right now. I used to urinate a lot, get tired, thirsty at all times, hunger. So my mom was told by her friend that maybe it might be diabetes. My mom's friend, since she was diabetic, she tested me with her glucometer, and then they found out that my blood sugar was high, so I was taken to hospital. And from there, I had medications until I was discharged. I was 12 years. They couldn't tell me in details, but they told me that I wouldn't be able to take sugary things at that time. So I couldn't understand. I was really angry. And then, like the doctors, as they were monitoring me and stuff, they told me that many children are living with diabetes like me, and I got a chance to meet all of them, and they gave me their storylines. So then I just tried to accept it. My mom was the one who was doing it, at times my cousin, and then I went to hospital during the checkup. They told me that at some point my mom might not be there, or whoever was injecting me, since I had support from the nurses. So I would just go every single morning. I go there, inject myself, then go for breakfast. In the evening, I do the same. The people who knew that I was diabetic were only my closest friends and my classmates at some point. And I never wanted them to tell many people that I was diabetic because I was fearing that I might be discriminated. My message to the young people is that diabetes is a controllable condition. They should not fear it. If I live with diabetes and I'm okay, then they can. Surely they can.
Very encouraging there from Hadija, but then again, that is the reality of those that live with type 1 diabetes, especially those that are younger, under 18 or, under 21, if you may put it that way. And that's what we'd like to understand today. Type 1 diabetes, even as we mark our Diabetes Awareness Month, which is done every November of every year. And to help us do so, in studio we have Dr. Gladys Gachanja, who is a pediatrician and pediatric endocrinologist at the Gertrude's Children's Hospital, also joined by Jane Wanjira, who is a caregiver to a child living with type 1 diabetes, Kenneth Chege, who is also a caregiver with a type 1 diabetes child, and of course Yusuf Abdulaziz, who is also a caregiver to a child living with type 1 diabetes. Thank you all for being part of this conversation. And Dr. Gachanja, I definitely will start with you because we need to understand some intricacies around type 1 diabetes. It is a chronic condition, as you had heard me say earlier, in which the pancreas produces little or no insulin. So first, let's define what the role of the insulin is in our body.
All right. Thank you very much. Insulin is a hormone. It is produced by a pancreas. It is an organ in our body, specifically by beta cells. So the action of insulin is to help cells take glucose into the cells. So I can put it like it's like a key which opens the door for the cells so that the glucose will enter and will be used for energy by our organ.
And in this case, we're saying the pancreas produces little or no insulin. What causes that?
Yeah. So in type 1 diabetes, as you rightly said, the cause is deficiency of insulin. So the cause is not that clear, but we have this genetic predisposition and some environmental triggers resulting in autoimmune destruction. So autoimmune means we have our immune system which fights against infection, right? So in case of autoimmune process, you are actually attacking yourself. So the immune system will attack the pancreas, specifically the beta cells, which result in destruction. So they are not able to produce insulin. Usually it occurs by like more than 90% of beta cell mass is gone with that process. So they are not able to produce enough insulin. That's why they need insulin to survive.
Okay, so we know there are a couple of types of diabetes. So for purposes of this conversation, let's differentiate type 1 and type 2.
All right. So broadly, they are classified as type 1 and type 2, though we have also other forms of diabetes, but now that is not our focus.
Yeah.
So type 1 is mostly diagnosed in children, but it can occur at any age, specifically above 1 year. Then it tends to be more common in lean individuals, and there is no specific pattern of inheritance, and there is insulin deficiency, so they need insulin for their survival. So when you see type 2, it is common in adults, mostly post-pubertal age or after adolescent. And they have the pathogenesis, or the cause for type 2 diabetes is more of an insulin resistance. They produce insulin, but the body demand is much higher, or the insulin is not acting the way it was supposed to be. So they have this insulin resistance or impaired action, and also relative deficiency. They are not able to produce enough what the body requires. So it is a combination of a relative deficiency and resistance. It occurs in adults, and there is always, in 80%, they tend to have a positive family history, and usually it is managed with oral medications just to improve their sensitivity to the insulin or to reduce their glucose. We call them oral hypoglycemic agents. So that is the difference.
Okay.
The major difference, I can say.
Now that we have that perspective, let's understand the intricacies of living with this condition. And I'll start off with you, Jane. You have a teenager who is living with type 1 diabetes. When did your journey start with your daughter?
Thank you very much. Our journey started when our daughter was 9 years old. We have now walked the journey for 7 years. She is now 16 years, and she has learned through the journey to manage the diabetes type 1.
So what about her when she was 9 years old that told you something was off?
We started off by noticing that her weight was going down, but she's a very active child, very sporty. But 2 days she complained of stomach upset. So we felt this stomach upset needed to be checked. So when we went to the doctor, the first thing the doctor decided to check was the sugars. And the sugars were at 21, which was quite high. So the next question the doctor asked us was, is your child diabetic? And we got shocked. We said, no, we don't have a history. Nobody in our family has diabetes, not even her grandparents by then. So we got confused.
Okay.
That's where our journey started.
All right, let me hear from Kenneth. How about you? You have a 11-year-old boy living with type 1 diabetes. When did this become a reality?
So thank you, Gladys. So this became a reality for us last year during this COVID season. And for us, I think we've just walked this journey only for 1 year. And it has been a challenging journey because having a child with diabetes was really not an easy thing, even to accept it as parents, and something that we didn't know about.
Ah, so was this the first time you were hearing diabetes in your family?
Yes, in our family we have no history of diabetes, and so this came as a shock for us because even in our own immediate family there is none of us who is diabetic.
Okay, and what about Joni, who is the patient here? What about him that made you know something was not right?
So, so our son started by getting very thirsty because he would get very thirsty. He would drink water excessively. And that became of a concern. And so, and I remember one day we did notice some ants in the toilet bowl. And my wife told me that there must be something that is amiss. And so we decided to seek for medical attention and have him tested. And that is when we got the news that our son is diabetic because his sugar was really high. The good thing is that we had a good pediatrician who really was there to support us, counsel us, and also help us through this journey.
Okay, all right. Now, we are also joined by Yusuf Abdulaziz, who is actually joining us from Mombasa. You have a 2-year-old son who was diagnosed earlier on in this year. What were the symptoms?
Well, Ammar used to have a lot of water intake and used to wet his bed, extreme urination at night. So even when he was wearing his diaper, the whole bed used to get wet with urine. And he started getting weak. And that was a concern for us. That's when we took him to the hospital.
Okay, and when you say weak, you noticed he became what? He wasn't playing as much, or what was going on?
He kind of developed some, weakness, as in he couldn't stand. He couldn't play around.
Okay, we seem to have lost Yusuf, but we'll be back with him in a moment. But Dr. Kasai, something that is coming out as a common factor here is the fact that they were all shocked that their children were diabetic. Now, tell me this. You mentioned there are genetic factors and environmental factors. Is it possible to actually have a child with diabetes and none of you have?
Yes, as I said earlier, type 1 diabetes, when it comes to the cause, it's not that very clear. There are a lot of facts that we don't know, but what we know so far, there is that genetic susceptibility. Like some kids, they develop diabetes with the same environmental triggers, some they don't. So we have some genetic phenotypes that predispose you to develop diabetes compared to the other population in the society. So yeah, there is no family history. Actually, in majority of the case with type 1 diabetes, as I said earlier, there is no family history. It's like 2 or 3 out of 100, they may have a family history of diabetes. Otherwise, it is not, there is no a clear pattern of inheritance from your parents.
Okay, something else that's coming out as a commonality is the fact that these children were extremely thirsty, taking too much water, and also urinating more than usual. Explain this.
Yeah. So as we initially, when we say diabetes, it is a condition characterized by high blood glucose levels. Yeah. So the cells are not able to take it in, so that glucose will accumulate in the blood. So for our kidney, there is a threshold. Yeah, the threshold is like the level of the glucose in the blood. If it is above 10 millimole or 180 milligram per dl, now you start excreting the glucose through the urine. So when you excrete glucose through the urine, you are actually losing also a lot of body fluids. Yeah, so to compensate that loss of body fluids, now you have to drink. So they keep on drinking. At the same time, they are actually losing the glucose and the body water. And since they are not using the energy from the glucose, the cells are starving. So our body has another way of generating fuels by using our store. That is now we start breaking down our muscles, fats, then that's why now they start losing weight because they are actually burning their stored fuels. And you can't sustain on these alternative fuels because as a byproduct, we have a chemical called ketones these chemicals are a bit toxic. So if you are not treated or not diagnosed early, they tend to come with acute complications.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So would that also explain why the children are also fatigued?
Yes, because they're not using energy from the glucose or from the food they're eating, and the cells are starved, so they lose their energy. They get fatigued, they are very sleepy. They have a lot of deterioration in school performance, especially when it comes to adolescent or school-going children. So because they are not using the energy from the food, they are burning their body storage, and that fuel is also not sustainable, so they tend to get fatigued.
Now, there's something that Kenneth has mentioned that both he and his wife noticed whenever Johnny would go and, you know, pee in the toilet, some ants would collect. What's that about?
Yeah, because I said you are losing glucose actually through the urine. So that urine is sweet. It has a lot of sugars, and we all know ants like sugars.
Yeah,
Yes. So
okay.
you see them
Interesting.
around that urine.
All
Yeah.
right, so that's definitely a telling factor. So in case we are not very sure about the symptoms, because each parent has mentioned the symptoms they saw in their children, perhaps if you're not seeing these are the ones that are obvious, what else should you look out for to perhaps tell the difference between a child who's just going through their developmental stages vis-a-vis one that has diabetes?
Yeah. So the symptoms are really classic. Usually there is a lot of excessive thirst, excessive urination, especially at night, and the bedwetting in a toilet-trained child. If there is a recent onset of bedwetting and if it is frequent, this is the red flag signs that you should take your child for a checkup. Just have this random blood sugar or the blood sugar checked. It is very simple and it can actually save lives. Yeah.
All right then. Now let's hear from Jane. When you found out your daughter was a diabetic, how did life change for you to accommodate this new reality?
Thank you. Quite a number of things had to change because first of all, we got hospitalized for 1 whole week. And the first thing was trying to take the child through a process of understanding what is the challenge, and also taking every member of the family through the process of understanding what is the challenge. One of the things that had needed to change in the house was the kind of food we were eating, because it was not going to work for us to eat the same kind of food we were eating while there's a child who requires a different type of diet. And therefore, we had to reach a point of whereby, as a family, we agreed, let us change with the child. If we are increasing the intake of vegetables for the child, we also need to increase vegetable intake for the family. And if we are reducing the starch, let everybody reduce the starch. But one of the challenges was that, or one of the advantages that we had as a family was, this is a child who never ever took sugars. Actually, all her life, she never took sugar, she never liked sugar, she never took sweets, she never took ice cream. So maybe for us as parents, we saw like God was preparing us for a new journey that we never knew about it because we didn't struggle with sugar. For me, I'm not a person who takes sugar. So the only person who had to stop taking sugar was the dad at that particular point. Yeah. So we had to start from the food element of it.
A lot of adjustments.
Yes.
Okay. And Dr. before I move on to Kenneth, there are some people who said perhaps at times you can predispose your child to diabetes if you do not give them sugars at all. Is that true or not?
It's not true.
Okay.
It's not related with your sugar intake. Of course, it's not healthy to take a lot of refined sugars for any diabetic or non-diabetic child. But as I said, the high sugar is not because you are eating a lot of sugar. Rather, it is because you are not producing enough insulin and the cells are not taking it up. So it just accumulates in your blood, and having a high blood glucose levels for a long time will lead you to acute and long-term complications. So it's not directly related to the
consumption
simple sugars you're eating.
Okay, Kenneth. I mean, 10-year-old journey, new reality. How does life change for you?
So life had to really change for us. First of all, as parents, we had to accept that Johnny is diabetic. And what we did is embark on a journey of trying to learn more about this disease. And then a lot had to change, as Jane has put it, that diet has to change. And we had to get a lot of consultation, even from the doctors, from the specialists, from nutritionists, to know what has to change. One, we had to really look through the diet. So the diet had to change. A lot of ratios in terms of how you have to measure food. Really, I think when we even eat on our own, I think rarely do we measure food and say you have to have this number of carbs, or even calculations that had to go into that. So that had to change. Another thing that had to change is that when you look at even things that children love, unlike Jane, our child used to take sugar. So for him to be told that he cannot take sugar anymore, that was something that was quite shocking. And what he had to do is we had to supplement that with something else. And so we realized that as we did that, he started getting used to it, and kind of he started to acclimatize to it. But you know, with a child, it's a very big challenge, because once in a while he might sneak in a sweet, he might sneak in a biscuit, he might sneak in a snack. And so we really have to talk to him. We have to really see what to do. And we have to also stand with him and kind of support him and show him that we are supportive of what he's going through. Things like birthdays are really a challenge. And even in our house, we started adopting a new way of doing birthdays, where we would not have cake, I would have something alternative. And so even when we go outside to eat, where people have to eat sugar, I mean, a lot of intake of sugar, he really has to take it, but sometimes he has to take it really in a very minimal way. Because you realize if he takes a little bit more, then his sugar goes really high. And then now the problem is on managing that. So lifestyle had to change. And also the other thing is that also in terms of testing his sugar, you realize like for him, he has to test sugar 4 times, which involves pricking of his finger, testing his blood sugar, which is really a challenge for a child. At the same time, he has to take insulin throughout. And so really, as a child, you also have to be very, very aware, because whenever he has an infection, whenever he's sick, you have to really, really be keen on that, because we've realized sometimes there are things in the body called ketones that can go really high, and he's been hospitalized because of the ketones in his blood. And so I mean, you, as a parent, you have to consistently be very aware, be very, very aware of the environment around him. Wherever he is, you have to keep on checking on him and finding out how he is. I think sometimes you're even tempted to go at night and check on him and see whether he's sleeping okay.
I hear you,
Yeah.
I hear you. Oh, wow. And Dr. when you talk about these ketones, what exactly are they and why are they dangerous in high levels?
Okay, so ketones are the byproduct or the end product of fatty. When we start using the fats as a fuel, that means we are actually degrading them to make a glucose, like a source for energy. As a byproduct, you release these ketones. So these ketones, when they accumulate in the blood, they actually are toxic to the brain. They affect your breathing, and they are very dangerous.
Okay.
Yeah, just to put it as simple.
All right. Now we're keeping it very simple, because it is important that we all understand what type 1 diabetes is and how to manage the same. I believe we have Yusuf back on the line. Yusuf, you were saying that your child was fatigued, he was lethargic, he was peeing more than usual. What else about his symptoms made you know there was something wrong?
That were the main symptoms that we noticed in Ammar. Well, he also lost interest in playing with kids. He used to fall asleep more often. Didn't have the energy to walk around. So it raised a concern, and he was hospitalized. He was immediately taken into ICU for 2 nights. And we then flew him to Nairobi to see the endocrinologist at Kilimani Diabetes and Endocrine. That's when we got to know that he was actually a type 1 diabetic, and there was no cure for it apart from insulin.
Was this the first time you were hearing of diabetes in your family?
Well, my aunt is also diabetic from my mom's side. We actually think of it being a genetic issue, because Ammar used to fall sick more often. And that's when the doctors advised that it could be a viral infection. A virus could have hit his pancreas that caused it to be an autoimmune disease.
Okay, and after that diagnosis, I mean, the child is only 2 years old. How have
He is
you,
only 2 years old, yeah.
yeah, how have you had to manage it, considering both Jane here and Kenneth have older kids who can understand? Amar is only 2.
Well, he can't even speak or explain to us anything about his condition. So when we saw the doctor in Nairobi, she advised us to go for the CGM, the continuous glucose monitoring, of which it has really helped our lives from pricking him a lot. You know, we used to prick him almost 5 to 6 times in a day. With a 2-year-old, that was very difficult for us to manage.
Yeah.
So with the help of the CGM, it has at least helped us to avoid the pricks, removing the blood every time from the child. So yeah, we are coping up with it now.
Okay, all right. Now, this is where it gets really intricate because you're dealing with children and an adult would understand the importance of following through with certain routines to ensure that they are well. In this case, we're talking about a 16-year-old and a 10-year-old, or rather 11-year-old and a 2-year-old. First of all, for purposes of what Yusuf has just said, he says that they needed to continuously prick him throughout the day. Why is this so important?
Yeah, so management of diabetes actually needs frequent monitoring. So monitoring is now you have to check the sugars on an ideal situation 6 to 7 times per day to see we are within the range. Yeah, we want to keep the sugars within the normal range. We actually give them a target based on the age and everything. Then to know that you are within the range, it's always good to check or monitor your blood glucose levels, because as I said earlier, having a high sugar levels for a long period gives you complications later. So we need this monitoring. One is to adjust the dose of the insulin based on the blood glucose. At the same time, it also helps you with the diet, what to give next. And the other, especially for kids like Yusuf's child, for kids less than 5 years, there is also a risk of having low blood sugar, which is more dangerous when it comes to an acute complication. So you need to monitor. If it is low, you have to correct it.
Okay.
Yeah, because they don't verbalize the symptoms, so they need more frequent monitoring. Yeah.
Okay, so for children and especially those, I mean, 2-year-old, you can imagine keeping on to prick their finger every other 2 hours, is it?
Not 2 hours. We usually check them before they eat and 2 hours after the feeding to see how the food and the insulin is matching in an ideal situation. Yeah, then whenever you feel like he's a bit off, it is good to also check to make sure his sugars are not also low. As I said, that is the dangerous thing.
So there's no other option of checking the sugar levels apart from the pricking?
Yeah, so there are other alternatives. Continuous glucose monitoring device. That is like a device which you attach on the child. Then it gives you the blood glucose levels continuously. It has an app. You can actually download that app on your phone and you can actually see and act accordingly. But that doesn't completely avoid the finger pricks because you have to cross-check at times to make sure the machine is also working.
Now, taking you back to the causes of this again, you talked about genetics, but also Yusuf said, some doctors said it could have been triggered by a viral infection. Is this something that you have seen?
Yeah. As I said, there is that genetic predisposition, then there is that environmental trigger. So among the environmental triggers postulated so far are viral infections, some diets and chemicals. So these common viral infections like influenza virus, parainfluenza virus, quite a lot of virus can trigger that autoimmune process. Yeah.
Okay, now let's go back to a bit of this risk factors. Now, we're talking about children here, and I was reading up on the fact that the first peak can occur between the age of 4 and 7, and the next peak at the age of 10 and 14. Why these age brackets?
Yeah. So it is still related with the cause, the possible cause, because when you see the age, the first peak is the school-going kids or school age groups, yeah? So that is the time where they get quite a lot of infections. So in genetically predisposed child, that could be a triggerer for that autoimmune process, then they will develop the disease. Then the other peak in adolescent, it is related also with your hormonal profiles. As we know, adolescent is a phase from childhood to adulthood. So we have a lot of hormonal changes, like we have high levels of growth hormone, the sex steroids like testosterone, estrogen, and androgen. These are the hormones which actually antagonize the action of the insulin. So they give you a bit of a relative insulin resistance. So in genetically predisposed child, you are expected to produce more insulin, but they are not able to do so. So they now present with diabetes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we can walk with the fact that Jane's daughter diagnosed at 9, that's a preteen. Joni diagnosed at 10, that's also a preteen. Perhaps that could have been the case, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So in the case of a 2-year-old, what do you think?
So I have tried to mention it is not that clear. Yeah. But yeah, there are kids, they present a bit early as 1 year, and some they develop it later. So we don't have a clear answer to that, why some is developing early, some is not, yeah? So it is related still with that genetic susceptibility, then the triggerer, and the autoimmune process being really fast in some kids, and in others it takes a bit of years and months. So before you develop diabetes, the autoimmune destruction takes months to years. So in some it takes months, then they develop the disease. Some it takes years, then they develop the disease later. Yeah, so that is the possible explanation I can give.
How old has been your youngest patient?
1 year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you say it can develop later on in life, how old are we talking about?
So there is no specific upper limit for type 1 diabetes. You can develop it by 30 years.
Oh.
Yes, but as long as, you know, we look onto risk factors, then we have also tests to check whether you are producing antibodies to your these beta cells. We have a way of checking them. There are ways we diagnose type 1 in adults, because it will be, because the commonest is type 2, so you have to make sure we are not dealing with type 1. So by doing this autoantibody screening, then as I said, there is no upper limit for it, but it is very common in children and young adults.
Okay. Now, I would like to hear from you. Remember, our question of the day to you is, do you live with or are you a caregiver to a child living with type 1 diabetes? What is the biggest challenge managing this condition? Talk to us. That hashtag is new normal. Chokora Msafi says living with a child with diabetes is very difficult because medication is expensive. Thank you for sharing. Kafura says there are solutions available that make type 1 diabetes management bearable, especially for the child and caregiver, but these are either too expensive or unavailable in Kenya. Thank you, Kafura, for sharing. Karanja Chege says the biggest challenge is the cost of managing diabetes. Strips, insulin, and other consumables are very expensive. Asante Sana. Juguna Wanjira says the challenges increase, especially when you have to change the diet to accommodate the child suffering from type 1 diabetes. This is more stressful, especially in families where even accessing one meal a day is a miracle. We hear you, Njuguna. Thank you. Kurashili says the cost of managing diabetes, the strips, insulin, and diet. I think this has come up a couple of times. Thank you for sharing, and we'll delve more into that even as we understand the reality of living with type 1 diabetes. And I think at this point, let's quickly take a short break. When we come back, you've heard that Jane has a 16-year-old daughter living with this condition. And Daktari has said that when you're crossing over to puberty, life can get a little bit complex. So how has it been for Jane and her daughter? We hear that right after this short break. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with Your World. My name is Gladys Gachanja. Today we're focusing on type 1 diabetes, even as we are marking the Diabetes Awareness Month. And still helping us with this conversation, Dr. Menberek Hase, who is a pediatrician and pediatric endocrinologist at the Gertrude's Children's Hospital, Jane Wanjira, Kenneth Chage, and Yusuf Abdulaziz, who are all caregivers with children with type 1 diabetes. Now, Jane, I mentioned when we went to break that there are some certain intricacies that come with getting into the adolescent stage, especially with a child with type 1 diabetes. What are these challenges, new challenges, so to speak, that you've had to face?
Thank you. The first one is, this is a stage full of identity. And one of the challenges that we have faced is our daughter raising an issue and asking, why am I so different? Why do I have to keep on injecting? Why do I have to keep on setting myself apart from everybody else? And this has really been a challenge, because you need to take time and take the child through to remind her that this is not a disease that she's going to overcome overnight, and it is a disease which is lifelong. But being a teenage, she feels that it is not fair. And therefore, sometimes we are faced with tantrums of, it is not fair to me. But slowly by slowly, as you encourage her and you link her up with her peers who are also going through that, then she is able to cope up with it. Number two aspect is what the doctor mentioned, especially when you're dealing with the menstruation cycle. One of the things that happens is that the hormones just make the sugars become chaotic. And when the sugars go up, one of the things we have also noted, especially with the teenagers, is that their tempers also flare. And therefore, you are faced with a situation here is a child who has diabetes, who has now temper because the sugars are very high, and you are not sure how to handle it. But I think as we have gone through the journey several years now, we have actually reached a point of where we can even understand when the tempers go up. We are keen, especially like as a mother, I'm keen to know where are we in the cycle. If the cycle is around that time, what we'll do is just take her for a drive. She will relax and she will come back as a happy person, and it helps. Yes. And
when you talk about tempers, is just that irritability that comes with that time of a month, right?
I would define it as more. It is no. It is not just the calm one where somebody feels I don't want to talk to anybody. You can ask this child something very simple and she will just flare up. So we had to note that element. We didn't realize it. Actually, we had to contact the doctor and ask what is happening. That is when the doctor mentioned to us and said, check the sugars. If she is in this puberty level, if she is around the menstruation cycle, just to know that this is going to happen. So we started preparing. And so we have learned. Every time that happens, we know, take her for a drive, let her relax, bring her back, and then she'll be the normal person, you know.
Okay. Now, help me understand. Let's take a few steps back. When she was diagnosed, definitely younger, did she understand this new reality, or did you shoulder the bigger burden here?
It was one of the biggest challenges. And I think for us, our daughter had another challenge. She lives with a disability. She is a hearing impaired child. So for her, she was looking at this and asking, how comes I am the one who has a problem with hearing? Now I have to manage this. So it was not just a shock for us as parents, but it was a double shock for everyone within the family. But one of the interesting things, I think because of her hearing disability, she has a mechanism of fighting. She can stand up for herself. I think it reached a point of whereby she realized, you know what? This is a journey. I have my parent to support me. And with this, then we can be able to move. So one of the biggest things that actually has worked for us is as a family to be there to support her. And when she feels she's supported, she has moved a step at a time. But it doesn't mean that you'll not have highs and lows at times. They can be very bad sometimes.
Okay, all right. Let me hear from Kenneth. You have a young man, 11 years old. He is clearly just 2 years shy to being called an official teenager. How is life looking like now?
So I think for him, he also took a bit of time before he could actually get to a point where he's accepting it. And so I think for us, the biggest challenge has been making him more active. He's a very active boy. And what we realized with a diabetic child is that they have to consistently be very, very active. So he would go outside, he would skate, he would run, he would cycle, and he would do all those things. And so for him, maybe the only thing is that sometimes when his sugar is a bit low, you can find that his moods can change. He can be a bit low. He can seem to not want to do anything. But, and also when his sugar is high, sometimes not easy to know, but unless you have tested him and known that he has that, the sugars are really high. But for him, I think the thing is to keep him always be very active. And also I think that also helps him to relax, helps him to, we're always finding things to do for him. One time he might be interested in gaming, he might want to do a bit of gaming, just to get something that would make him interested and kind of relaxed, and we find that helps in the management better.
Has he noticed that he is different from other children?
So one is, one thing is that he knows he's different because like now he has to test his sugar throughout. His diet changed, he has to change stuff around in terms of what he eats, so he has to check on what he's eating. He's become more conscious and aware of things that he needs to do and things that he doesn't need to do, because he's actually at an age that he understands more. And of course, he sees himself different from other children because I don't think he has any friends around his friends who are diabetic. And so even actually talking about this and trying to enlighten the friends about it. Because also the other challenge we get is that some of his friends might look at him differently. There are kids who even think that type 1 diabetes is contagious. You can imagine a child that is among the friends and one of the friends says that just take care of this, or I mean, don't be so close to them, maybe this disease can jump onto you. And really, I mean, as a child, even psychologically, that can really affect them.
Yeah. And how do you handle that?
So what we do is that we talk to him and he gets to understand. We also talk to his friends about it. And my wife and I mean, feel the burden of this even for more parents who are having to go through this. And creating awareness for people to understand what is type 1 diabetes, how can you manage it, what are some of the reasons that this happens, and also just to keep people sensitized and aware of this condition, and to know if you know somebody or a friend who is diabetic, how do you handle them, how do you treat them, how do you even make them more comfortable? Because really, it's not a contagious disease as some people might think. Yeah.
Okay, now Yusuf, for you, a 2-year-old is easier to manage in terms of, okay, fine, it's a double-edged sword. They can't tell you when things are wrong. You have to be very, very observant. But then again, it's easy to shelter him from the world. So how do you see yourself walking with him this journey? Because he will start asking questions and wondering why there's some things he cannot do and his friends do.
Well, since he's just 2 years old, he cannot even express what he's feeling. We cannot know he cannot actually advise us what his symptoms are. This is us as parents who are monitoring him full time. With the help of the CGM also, we can monitor his glucose levels gradually. And as a parent right now, we are his pancreas. So it is quite difficult for us as well mentally. But Amar is a fighter, and he's managing it well. Also, he is gotten to understand what he is going through. At times, he is going to measure his glucose levels himself.
Oh, really? That's impressive to a 2-year-old. Okay. And let me understand this. You said you have a relative with type 1 diabetes. Has that helped, as far as being given tips here and there?
Well, we got the tips from her, but she's an adult. Managing an adult type 1 diabetic is different from managing a toddler. His levels of insulin intake is also low compared to the adult. So we are getting to learn as we are progressing with his condition.
Okay. Now, Dr. Kasai, you are a pediatrician first and then now a pediatric endocrinologist. We are dealing with young minds here who are expected to take on such a huge responsibility, that of managing a lifelong condition. What do you normally advise the parents that have to walk with them?
Yeah. So, yeah, diabetes is a chronic condition. You're going to live with it. And it needs also that. Yeah. So what I advise to the parents is they need to be open about it. It's always good to share the diagnosis of your child with everyone, with friends, with the household, teachers, and healthcare workers, so that everybody will be supportive and they will assist you in progressing towards the healthier life of your child. So I will say always be open and talk about it, so that the society will understand and it will be taken as a normal than being stigmatized about it. Yeah.
Okay, Khadija, as you had the lady that we heard earlier, the young lady who is in high school, she talked about living with this condition and owning it and saying there is a hope despite having to deal with insulin and pricking herself, and even as she goes through teenagehood. But I'm really curious to understand, for you, Jane, you see, most often than not, it feels like this child needs to be under constant observation. But then again, there is an importance of empowering this child because soon they will leave your stable. How are you handling that?
I would say, just to start off, is the starting point, as the doctor has said, is you parents. If you have not accepted the situation, it is very difficult to empower the child. When the parents have accepted, then you are capable of empowering the child and training them to realize that if this is a long life or a chronic disease, then at one point, these parents are not going to be there. So what do? You train them from the starting point, the pricking bit, slowly by slowly. It will not come automatically. But it reaches a point whereby within a month, 2 months, the child already knows the routine. So they'll even tell you, we have not checked my glucose this morning. We have not checked my glucose at 1. We have not checked at 4. So they start forming a routine. And when the routine gets put in their mind, they are able to develop. But one of the things that is important is to facilitate the child to know that they are not the only ones and they can live with it. Connect the children, and especially when they reach teenage, please connect them with another teenager, 2, 3, 4 of them, so that they can be able to share that this is what I'm facing, or this is what I'm grumbling about, this is how my sugars have been, and that actually I've seen it empowering the children. For a long time, our child was a day scholar. But this year, September, she said, can I try boarding? We got, first of all, shocked, but she said, don't get worried, I'll be fine. She said, we can try weekly boarding for the time being. And she has settled in. The nurse in the school does not do anything. Actually, she sends a report and says, this child is already empowered. So it is the responsibility of the parent to be able to guide the child, take them through slowly. Don't be in a rush. Because when you move in a rush, then the child feels you just want to get off me so that you can continue with your life. Be involved, continue. Go for the therapist. Go and learn with the nutritionist. Calculate the carbs with her. Be a part and parcel of that particular diet. I actually started taking her diet because of her. So I have found it quite easy, even when you're saying, can we change these vegetables to these vegetables? It has become very easy because she says, but you are part of it, so we are okay, let's move on.
Okay, and actually, if you think about it, that diet is actually healthier, yeah?
Yes, very healthy.
All right. Now, Kenneth, there is also the flip side where we have parents that are very territorial. They are very, they want to keep the child to themselves. They want to protect them because it's their nature to ensure that they do not get hurt by the world. But this is counterproductive. So how are you ensuring that you can empower your son, but also kind of shield him from all this negativity that can come with the stigma associated to this or with this condition?
So, so in terms of a parent being protective, I think most parents would be, because this is a condition that the parent has to think through and think through how to manage it with their child. But for us, we try to make him more independent. For instance, now he knows how he can test himself. He can take his insulin. He knows, like for instance, where to prick himself in terms of testing the sugar. He knows whenever he needs to take his insulin, whether it would be put it on the arm, on the belly, or on his thigh, and he knows how often he needs to do that. He knows how to check whether he has lumps on his surfaces, so that at least to make sure that the insulin is absorbed better. And so we have empowered him to just make sure that even when we are not there, he can be able to test his sugar. He knows when to take something, or glucose, or how to manage a sugar low. And he knows whenever he has food, what quantities he has to take. And because he's in school, we have also tried to talk to the teachers, train them, educate them, and people around him, because you know when he's not home, he's in school, and also in school he needs people to take care of him. So he knows whenever even he walks to the teacher and says, this is how I'm feeling, quickly they know what to do, so that they manage that particular situation. So I would say he's empowered and he's enabled to, to do that himself. I know at some point, as Jane said, he will need to move out. He will need to do more. He will need to be more independent. And I think this is a learning journey. For us, we've done it only for 1 year. Yeah. But we know as we walk slowly with him, by the time he gets to that age, he will be able to have gotten used to it more.
Okay, now, of course, as you learn the journey, the boy is growing up, and maybe, perhaps just like Jane, one day he'll surprise you. I want to go to boarding school like my friends. Are you open to it, or are you at least preparing yourself for that eventuality?
I am still preparing myself. I guess also my wife is preparing herself for that eventuality, but we know the day will come, and he will need to move out. Yeah. And so for us, I think what we do is to ensure that we prepare him for that day. And the preparation starts immediately. As you said, I think the need for parents to actually accept that this is a condition that is there, and for them to see how they can manage it better and better as we move on. So the day will come, and we are going to support him as much as possible to make sure that he transitions to the next level.
Okay. Yeah. Now, definitely, Dr. Kasai, the value of psychosocial support is so important, because this child is living a reality amongst others who do not have this kind of condition, but they have to thrive in the same environment. Is this something that you also perhaps include in your treatment plan with these children?
Yeah. So diabetes is not managed only by the doctor or the endocrinologist. It's like a multidisciplinary team. We involve behavioral and psychosocial therapists. We have dietitian, educator, and now the doctor to see how things are going. So they need a continuous psychosocial support, because in each phase they are going through a lot. We understand the psychological burden. So they have actually psychosocial therapists and psychologists in Gertrude's, where when we feel there is a need, they usually go through it. Yeah.
Okay, Jane, have you opted for psychosocial support?
I have several parents that I interact with. We've not yet formed a group, but we thank God we are picking up several of us. Yes. Okay, now Yusuf, you are the latest entrant, so to speak, in this. Do you have a support group that's working with you?
Well, actually, my wife is into a group where a doctor had invited her into it. And yeah, we are getting some tips from those groups. But since this condition is a self-learning process, we are thankful for the groups, for the tips, and we are managing it well.
Okay, how about you, Kenneth?
So for us, I think we haven't, I think we are still learning and still getting people around us who can help us. I mean, referrals from different people. We are getting a group of people that have are going through the same thing, and helping each other in terms of talking and seeing how we can help each other to even sensitize more people. And even learn from each other. I've learned even groups, even social media groups, they are quite big groups that actually handle this, and a lot of advice. You'll find people posting questions, people posting a lot of challenges they are going through, and you find solutions are there, because somebody will say, I'm going through this, and somebody has a solution for that. So I think we are still trying to build that community, which I realized, I think we are in the setup we are in, the environment we are in, is still not very well known, and it's something that really needs to grow as we move on.
Okay, now let's talk about the treatment and management of this condition, and especially the cost implication. And I'll start off with you, Yusuf. A lot of feedback today saying the cost of the insulin. I mean, you talked about the machine that you have to use regularly, and even just keeping on testing that glucose level is quite expensive. Describe the expense to us.
Okay, the CGMs are not available here in Kenya. We got to know this CGM from a doctor at Kilimani Diabetes. And from there, we have been transacting with her for the CGMs. Actually, the CGM is called a Freestyle Libre. It comes with a sensor where you attach it on the hand, and you can monitor the blood glucose level with a monitor or a mobile device anytime, anywhere. So the device is quite expensive. It costs about up to 30 to 35,000, available in Kenya. And the sensors have to be changed every 14 days. So I have to make two times sensor in a month.
Oh, wow. And that would be?
The sensor would cost up to about 10,000 shillings.
And you have to change this twice or thrice a month?
Twice in a month. It lasts up to 14 days. So after 14 days, I have to make another change for the sensor.
Okay. And that is away from the insulin cost, right? Away
from the insulin cost, yeah.
Okay.
We opted for the CGM so that we avoid the prickings, but yeah, we are managing it well.
Okay, now that's an expense on its own, and I'm curious to know, do you have this covered perhaps on your insurance, or do you have support from NHIF?
No, currently Kenya does not even know anything about the CGMs. And the insurance are not covering any cost of the sensors. As well, we would appreciate if the insurance would also cover the cost of insulin pumps, because that's the next step where I'm looking forward to ease the pain in pricking a 2-year-old child.
Okay. Now, Kenneth, I mean, apart from the whole change of lifestyle for the family and many other adjustments, there's this cost implication. How are you handling it?
So the cost is real, and it's very high. For instance, our son has to use the pen. He uses two types of insulin, one which is a long-lasting one and one that is rapid. And so for the rapid one, at least he uses two. The cost of one is about 2,500 shillings, so that's about 5,000 shillings a month. And then now you come to the issues of testing his sugar. So the strips, he has to keep on using them. I would say a pack of strips, he would use about 2 to 3 packs, and that lasts, and the cost is around 1,000 shillings. So the cost is way above 5,000 shillings in a month. And so even if he's covered, I realized his medical cover did not even last him 3 months. It's supposed to go for a whole year, but those constant visits to the hospital, he has to keep on seeing the specialists to get advice, to see a nutritionist. All those costs put together are really high. So you find, even in as much as they have a cover, 3 months, and then from there, you as a parent, you are on your own. You have to keep on now looking for it. I think, as Yusuf says, the CGM machines are not available. That would be the ideal situation for us, even in our country. And that is why we want to lobby the government to even do something about it. Because if these machines were available and well, well priced, then the cost would really be manageable. It would really be better for most children. And we're not even talking about an insulin pump, which costs almost 300 to 400,000 shillings.
Oh, wow. Okay, how about you, Jane? What's your experience like?
The experience is the same, and actually it even gets a little bit more expensive as you hit teenage, because with the teenage you also increase the insulin dose. So the more insulin you're taking, the more you are going to be spending. Now, as Ken says, it is, even if you have an insurance, the insurance you can only use outpatient, and the outpatient cannot go beyond 3 months. So the costs are quite expensive. And because this is a child who has to constantly be tested, even the strips are actually also becoming very expensive. I wish there was a way we would even have some of these things even being zero rated, so that then the children who are suffering, the people who are suffering from diabetes can actually be able to access the necessities.
Okay, and definitely at this point it will be important to note that it's not only those with type 1 diabetes, it's anyone who's living with any kind of diabetes. Dr. what is your experience and how do you help patients who cannot afford the basics, as somebody had earlier mentioned?
Yeah, we understand that diabetes is an expensive disease, especially they need insulin for their survival. So as they clearly mentioned, it needs a lot of work, at least to make insulin and the strips to be reached for free. That is the ideal because it is a question of survival. So with regard to the price, yeah, they mentioned it's very expensive. Strips are also really expensive, especially we need to monitor, and we have some diabetic centers where they give at least free insulin for those who can't afford. But now you get the insulin, but you are not able to monitor because they don't get the strips for free. So it's really a challenge everyone is facing, even as a doctor, to just monitor how they are doing. So I will just also talk on their behalf. We should work toward a free insulin or subsidize the cost as much as possible to make a better control and prevent complication, because managing complication is much more expensive than preventing it through a good monitoring and taking your drugs. Even as a country, if you see the economic burden of managing complications like renal disease later in life, managing cardiac arrest, stroke is much more expensive than preventing them earlier. Yeah, that would be my message.
Okay, and now that you've touched a little bit on the complications that could arise due to type 1 diabetes, these children, how bad can it really get if it's not managed well?
Yeah, I first want to start with, if you monitor your sugars and if you keep your sugars within target, the risk of developing complication is very low, and they can actually live a healthier life. That should be the first message.
Yes.
Yeah, but if you fail to control your sugars and if you have high blood glucose levels for a long time, yeah, complication will be a must. Most patients, they develop complications later. The commonest is damage to your kidneys, resulting in failure. You will have blindness because it affects, high glucose levels affect the eyes and also the nerve. Now, with nerve damage, you might lose your limbs, amputations. And also these cardiovascular, stroke, hypertension, and lipid abnormalities. So these are the complications of poor control. Okay. But as long as you monitor your sugars within range, they can live actually a new normal life with a very low risk of complications.
And are we saying these complications can actually present themselves when they are still children, not necessarily when they're adults?
It takes minimum 5 to 10 years to develop complications, but with poor control, we are actually seeing younger patients having this end organ damage or damage to the kidneys and the eyes. Yeah, but it takes years, especially if you are taking insulin, if you are doing monitoring, it shouldn't be the case.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, at that point, I think we should quickly take a short break here on Your World. And when we come back, more on type 1 diabetes and how to live with this condition. But then again, we'll also be taking a look at the other world. We'll be right back. Well, back to our conversation of the day, type 1 diabetes. Remember, November marks the Diabetes Awareness Month. So remember, those numbers at the bottom of your screen is how you can actually reach out to our endocrinologist this morning, Dr. Kasai. And of course, we have parents and caregivers in studio and of course, joining us virtually who are speaking about their journeys. So they would also be of great help in as far as giving you support, even as you walk your own journey. And I think at this point, it is so important to understand understand the intricacies of actually living with this condition? And especially, Jane, there are some questions that are coming through to you. When you talk about so passionately about changing the diet within the home, the question is, what exactly changes apart from a lot of vegetables and your fruits when it comes especially to the starches? How are you handling that?
When it comes to managing type 1 diabetes, and actually diabetes as a whole, you need to be able to have less of the starch, or you need to have the starch which is more healthier, if I may use that language. And therefore, one of the things that actually goes with the diabetes is that you need to be able to have 3/4 of the diet coming from the vegetables. And if you have to take the starch, it is much more preferable that you take the starch which is also coming from the plant proteins, because the plant proteins like beans, the legumes actually have their own starch. And by so doing, then you are able to remove especially what we would call the processed starch. The ugali that we are so used to in this country, the rice, the macaronis, the spaghettis, those ones actually become a challenge. That is one of the things we had to do away with. We went back to what we would call the natural starch, the arrowroots, the sweet potatoes, but also taken in proportions. You can't just take as much. It's not the way you'll sit down and finish a whole sweet potato. It has to be taken in terms of quantities. Reduced quantities, but increase more of the vegetables, increase more of the proteins. But as you bring in the fruits, you also have to be very keen in terms of which fruits you bring, because there are some fruits which are very sugary. They actually spike the sugars. Like if you take a banana, take 1 or 2, at the end of the day, the sugars will go up because bananas have a lot of sugar. So you need to manage all that.
Okay. And for you, Kenneth, I mean, we're talking about kids here. For me as an adult, that sounds like a walk in the park, or at least I would adjust quicker knowing exactly why I'm doing this. For a child, how long did it take to convince Johnny that what he thinks is yummy is no longer good for you?
What I would say is that it has not taken a full convincing. We are still convincing him, because sometimes he does not understand why he doesn't need to put sugar in his tea. He doesn't understand why he has to take a certain portion of maybe chips or some level of carbs that he really likes. If he likes cakes, then he really doesn't understand. But we are in the journey of trying to convince him and let him know and understand the risk that comes with that, and the need for him to control his sugar. I would say that he's understanding it, and he's able to also check it. But as I had mentioned previously, once in a while he can sneak in a snack, he can sneak in a sweet. And then you find his sugar is a bit high, and you ask him, and he says maybe, yeah, I had 1 or 2, and that is something that we have to deal with on a daily basis. As Jane puts it, I think we have to really be cautious because of the carbs level. What we have learned is that the carbs, and sometimes I find myself even going to the shop, if I'm to buy something, I have to check the content. I mean, rarely do we check even the content of what we take in terms of composition. So we have to really check and see how many calories, how many carbs, and then go for what we think is really manageable for him. So it's a convincing journey, especially for a child. When you have to tell them, no, don't have to eat this. Try to take a bit of this. If it's chips, then he has to take like a cup of chips. Then he's like, I mean, I'm not full, I need another one. So we have to also substitute that with something like a vegetable or a fruit, or something that will make him feel full. I think for us, as a challenge in terms of diet is when he comes and says, I have eaten, I'm not full. Then you can't give him any more carbs.
Exactly.
So you have to think of something else that you have to give him that will make him full, and yet will not add on to his sugar.
Okay, so what do you do then? How do you add on to this? Because these are kids, they are burning more energy than you are. And he said, Hajashiba, what do you do?
So we try to substitute that with other healthier snacks. We do a bit of nuts, we do a bit of salads, a bit of vegetables. And so he can eat a bit of popcorn, something that may not add into his, on his sugar. So you really, as a parent, have to really research and look for things that would make his food interesting. Another thing, I think, the kind of environment we are in and the generation we are in, some of these things that we would eat, like arrowroots and then domas, it becomes a challenge for a child. Maybe they are not used to eating that often, and so when you start introducing that to them, you find there is a bit of resistance, like I don't like this kind of food, and that becomes a real fight and a real challenge. That you have to eat more of this, you have to take care of this, and for a child really who does not fully understand the situation, it becomes a bit of a fight with them. But I think with talking with them and convincing them and constantly introducing more interesting, like for John, we have to make his diet very interesting. We have to look for things that will make his food tastier, and knowing that even if he's eating different from others, but his food, I mean, he's proud of what he's eating, and he's able to actually eat that, and where he's not full, then he gets full, and that's okay.
Okay, now let me reference to Jane again, and remember I'm referencing to both Jane and Kenneth at this point because they have older children, so they have an opinion on what they are fed on or how to manage this condition. Jane, when she comes back and says, okay, fine, I had something that I shouldn't have had, and of course it leads to, you know, complications and you have to deal with it. How do you deal with that? It takes a lot of patience, is what I'm hearing. How do you handle?
It actually takes a lot of patience. One of the things we actually faced, and it is a problem that majority of the parents who have diabetic children are facing, is when children have to go to school. And before COVID, remember, children are very generous, so they'll share. So what will they be sharing? What kind of snacks have been carried to school? The kind of snacks that have been carried to school are not the healthy type. And therefore, they will share amongst themselves. So what will happen is that she will get to indulge because of the friends. But you get unhappy, but at the end of the day, you have to sit her down or him and tell her, look, when you take this, notice where your sugars are. When you don't take this, notice where the sugars are. And one of the things that we have seen, and especially with the teenagers, that as the sugars go up, we are adjusting more insulin. And it is not something they really like. They don't like that change of the insulin intake. When you start increasing, they start realizing something is not right. So you have to take them through the process slowly, educating them that it is a decision that they have to make on what to take. But the challenges, and that is why it also became, and it becomes very difficult for parents who have these children to actually even go for social gatherings. Because majority of those who are around us will not understand why the child cannot take a soda, why they can't take the processed juice, why I have to ask what is available for food. So sometimes you are curtailed, even you as a parent, in terms of the social gatherings that you're going to get involved. But it doesn't come. And sometimes there will be falls and up. Yeah. And mostly just take it a stride at a time, because if you get unhappy, then you actually create another problem.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So Yusuf, 2-year-old, again, you are in charge of their diet, but this is a new phase of your life. What did the nutritionist say rather is important for your child, considering they're still growing? So tiptoeing around the diet can be quite a challenge.
Yeah, we were advised to have a balanced diet for him. Not more of carbs, but give him more of proteins so that his sugar level doesn't rise a lot. And for the snack part, we give him nuts. So you know, we can't give him any more carbs once he has already eaten. We can't add him more food. You know, he's a kid. He would want to add. He won't want to eat. You would want a demand for food again. You know, we cannot control the kids, unlike controlling teenagers.
Yes. Okay, and I understand this because, Daktari, there are many who are saying this is one of the many challenges when it comes to managing type 1 diabetes, especially amongst children. When you think about these are the same children that need all the foods to help them grow, but still you need to tiptoe around the diet to ensure that they do not get complications. What's the balance?
Yeah, so the diet we recommend, there is no specific diabetic diet which is recommended to diabetic patients. It is actually a healthy diet which considers the calorie need for their growth and development. So I was actually hearing the parents saying a lot of restrictions. That is actually not the case. They shouldn't restrict the food. He should take what he used to take, but now you control the portions. Yeah, so the portion is also given in a way that calorie is enough for his growth and development. It shouldn't push him to the overweight range. He shouldn't be also underweight. Yeah, so that portion is calculated based on his age to achieve a normal growth and development. So when a patient is diagnosed with diabetes, there shouldn't be much change in his normal routine. What you do is now you control, because I understand our culture, we indulge a lot on starch and carbohydrates, then it will be a problem controlling. So that is the trick. Otherwise, there shouldn't be a lot of change with his diet, rather control the portions accordingly based on his age, and our goal is to achieve a normal growth and development. So there shouldn't be that much restriction, I would say. And the diet we recommend is a healthy, balanced diet. He should have his carbohydrate, he should have his proteins, his vegetables and fruits. Yeah.
All right. So for those that are breastfeeding and have been diagnosed with this, should a mother reconsider their diet they have, or doesn't it just stays the same?
It will stay the same. He will continue breastfeeding. Yeah, the problem managing a young child is now the erratic feeding. Yeah, because you can't now say you eat after 2 hours. You can't say you eat after 4 hours. You know, they keep on asking and you have to give them. So they will continue the breastfeeding. We also recommend a portion of the carbohydrate, the protein and everything, what he used to, based on his age for his normal development. We don't actually change a lot with what he used to. Then, yeah, with the management, the ideal will be using pumps than insulin injections because of this erratic feeding, and you can't cope up giving the insulin. Otherwise, there shouldn't be much restrictions or change with their diet after diagnosis.
A lot of learning from this conversation, even as we learned about type 1 diabetes, and even as we bring this conversation to a close, I'd like to hear from our caregivers this morning, and I'll start off with you, Kenneth. How would you encourage those that perhaps find themselves walking the same journey you're on today?
So in terms of encouraging the parents who would find themselves in this situation, one is if they notice some of the symptoms that we've talked about, they need to check and seek medical advice. They need to have the blood sugar for their children checked and confirm if really they have the type 1 diabetes. And then from there, they have to seek advice in terms of making sure that they're able to manage it, because really it's a management, it's a management condition. They need not to fear. It's a condition, and it's there. They have to really work on managing it. So what I would encourage them is to come out and make sure that they're able to seek help. They're able to seek counseling if possible, able to talk to people who are around them, to find more people who are going through this. Because you realize when you have something, that's when you find people who are also going through the same, and now you can come together and tackle this and handle this together. The other thing, maybe it's to the government as well to try in as much as possible to take care of these children in terms of costs. As you have learned, the cost is really, really expensive. I'm imagining, I met a boy who was raising money from the streets, and I thought he was raising money for food, but he later told me he was raising money for insulin. So he would get money, go to a pharmacy where he goes and pays the money, and then he is given. When the money gets to the amount they need, then he's given the insulin. And I found that really moving. And maybe the government to just look at this and see how can they support this, because the children are not many in the country, and I think they can be able to do it. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And Yusuf, you are on this journey a few months in, but it is going to be a lifelong journey, especially with your son. What would you like to say?
Well, we are thankful his condition is managed. We are managing his condition well. And to our doctors as well, to our nutritionists, and I would also encourage, as Kenneth said, I would encourage the government to create more awareness to this condition, as there are more cases arising. And as well for the cost of the insulins and the CGMs and the strips, we would also recommend the government to give us some kind of they could reduce the VAT part in the medications as well, so that it can be more affordable to the less fortunate.
Okay, now Jane, you said when you got this diagnosis you were shocked, but you also emphasized that acceptance gives you the empowerment and ability to support your own child. Reiterate this even as we close.
Yes, it is expected, and we'll not say that don't get shocked, but please don't remain there when your child is diagnosed with diabetes. You can still move forward. It is doable. All you need to do is commit yourself, get involved, learn as much as possible, and reach out. Every doctor, and the doctor we have in the show can actually affirm this. Every doctor has a list of some of the parents and the children who have actually gone through this. Reach out to them. They will give the contact of some of the parents, and the parents will hold your hand to walk with you. They will encourage you. Even when things are not working, you can still get encouraged because somebody will be there at the back to just tell you it is doable. We are now at 16 years, and our daughter has never been hospitalized with the diabetes complicated issues, and you can survive. But to the government, and especially as we discuss in this country about universal health care, it would be very important for us to consider taking care of some of these diseases, especially type 1, and especially for the children who are coming from very less privileged homes.
Yes. Very well said, very well said. And of course, Dr. Kasai, you deal with these patients from far and wide. Your encouragement to them, and of course, emphasis on the treatment and management of this condition.
All right. What I would say is, of course, it's a journey. It needs a lot of change in your routines, but we are all together, and it's doable. And with good control, they can actually live a normal life. And with the management plan, as I said, they need their insulin. Taking insulin is needed for their survival. And also, when they need psychological support, it is good to also seek for it, because we understand the psychological burden of the disease. Yeah, and I will also ask the government to step in and subsidize the cost of the management, because most individual patients are actually paying out of their pocket. You can imagine how difficult it will be. So we will really appreciate if they get the free insulin. Yeah, that will be the ideal situation.
Thank you. Dr. Manbere Kasai, pediatrician and pediatric endocrinologist at the Gertrude's Children's Hospital. We're also joined by Jane Wanjira, Kenneth Shege, and Yusuf Abdulaziz, who are all caregivers to children living with type 1 diabetes. I think a lot of light has been shed in as far as type 1 diabetes is concerned, but of course there are many other types of diabetes, and that's why this month is set aside to create awareness around diabetes. Well, tomorrow we zero in on family relations and highlight what could be a make or break for this institution. I'm talking about sibling rivalry. What causes it? How can parents equip their children with the skills to maneuver this eventuality? More on how to handle sibling rivalry tomorrow from 7 a.m. See you then.